Welcome to the Movie in Your Mind podcast, where we dive into classic movies that have left a significant cultural mark, but that our guests have somehow never seen. Each episode, we explore their expectations and imagined ideas about these iconic films, then contrast them with their immediate reactions after finally viewing them. Today, we are watching The Princess Bride. All right, hello and welcome to the Movie in Your Mind podcast. Today we are joined by novelist, podcaster, and musician Sebastian Bendix.
Hi, Chris. Nice to be talking to you on a podcast format.
This is not a new thing for us. I have been a frequent co-host on Sebastian's podcast, Tentpole Trauma, which you should definitely check out.
Yeah, and in fact, I was delighted to find out that the movie that we're discussing tonight is, in fact, a tentpole trauma. This movie underperformed at the box office. It was not a big hit. Yeah, I mean, it's got a big cultural footprint. It's become a sort of memeable classic, but this movie is not a big hit. It was a financial disappointment for sure. So, but I will say that, if you like the discussion about the movies that disappointed at the box office, check out Tentpole Trauma and hear Chris discuss some fun box office disasters like Ghost in the Shell, Alita Battle Angel, and stuff like that.
And we did the 1984 Dune, I believe, right?
That was our first podcast.
That was a fun one.
Yeah.
And The Abyss. Yeah,
that's right.
Lots of good stuff there. In addition to The Stronghold, which is available through Amazon, which is a great novel that Sebastian wrote, what else do you have cooking on the novel front?
I'm currently shopping a heavy metal horror novel called Hellbent for Heather. We've been out to some publishers and we're hearing back. And this is a while off, but I am working on my first fantasy novel, which sort of ties into the subject here, called The Prophecy Thieves, which I'm excited about. Hopefully that'll be out next year. And I think it'll be a good one.
Sounds intriguing. I'm excited. So how did you consume movies growing up?
Movies have been a huge part of my life since I can remember. I mean, I was going to movies at like 5 years old. You know, I saw Star Wars in the theater in 1977, saw Alien in the theater in 1979 when I was way too young to see it, but it was and still is my favorite movie of all time because of that.
That's some serious cred, man.
Some good cred. But by the time high school and the age of the VCR rolled around, you know, a lot of hanging out at friends' houses and watching like horror movies that we couldn't get into, like, you know, the Nightmare on Elm Street movies or whatever. And then by the time we were sort of in our mid to late teens, we had a movie theater in a mall that we would go to regularly, and they were really slack about R-rated movies. Nice. They did not give a shit at all. And so, like, you know, we saw like Hellraiser and stuff like that, my teenage friends. One of my most prized memories was the weekend that Aliens came out. My friend Ben and I were both just completely, you know, insanely stoked to see Aliens. But I remember we had to walk to the Burlington Mall in Massachusetts to see Aliens. We walked. Right. It was like 5 miles or something, but we were like, we're seeing Aliens. And I remember afterwards, we walked home and we were just like, that was the most amazing movie I've ever seen. We just, you know, we're just completely jazzed about it. So, you know, 80s kid movie upbringing. And this is probably sort of leads into the fact that I didn't ever see The Princess Bride at this point in the late 80s when this came out.
Yeah.
This wouldn't have been on my radar. Like I would have seen this and been like, I don't want to see that. You know, I was more into like horror and sci-fi and stuff like that. I've since become a big fantasy fan and I, you know, love the Lord of the Rings movies and stuff like that. But it makes sense to me why I did not see The Princess Bride at the time it came out. It would not have interested me as a late teenager who was listening to Guns N' Roses and shit and smoking cigarettes.
So what turned you off about it is just the name or the tone of the movie, the projected tone of the movie?
Yeah, it just looked kind of like a little bit fluffy and not the kind of, you know, fantasy movie I would have wanted to see. Like, even Legend, I remember when Legend came out,
yes.
which I would say is somewhat comparable because, I mean, this movie exists in that sort of 80s, mid 80s fantasy space.
Fantasy. Absolutely.
And that movie would have been more appealing to me, but I didn't see that movie in the theater either. And I don't even think I saw Willow in the theater. So,
I saw that one.
Yeah,
I loved it at the time. And then when I returned to it, I'm like, what is this?
If I had been younger, I definitely would have seen it. If I was in like middle school, I would have totally seen Willow, but I was just a little too old. It looked a little too kiddie. You know, it wasn't like The Princess Bride looked kiddie, but it just looked like a romance or something. I wasn't that interested in it at the time. I've always meant to watch it, so I was kind of glad that this was the movie that we landed on because I've been meaning to watch it and I just never got around to it. So
I'm very excited. Yes, the title Princess Bride doesn't exactly scream swords and dragons and the Excalibur.
Yeah, like my fantasy was Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah,
that was my fantasy.
This is so far from Conan the Barbarian.
I had like a Conan poster on my wall and stuff. Like that was my guy, you know. So this was no Conan, I could tell that.
Fair enough. So what is your impression of this movie in regards to film history?
Can I just give you sort of my take on what I think is in The Princess Bride? Because I'm sure I've caught bits and pieces of it here and there on TV or whatever, but I've never sat down to watch it seriously. I know there's like a framing device, right? Like it's a story being told to a kid. I believe the kid is Fred Savage. You don't have to say right or wrong. I know I've probably got this wrong, but in my mind, the dad is Judd Hirsch. But like, I don't think that's right. I think it's some other Jewish actor. I know it's a Jewish actor, but I just always go right to Judd Hirsch because I'm a big Hirschman fan.
Yeah.
Obviously, I know Carey Elwes is the hero. And it's funny because this was the movie that kind of broke him, but I've never seen it. So I'm sort of like, I've always known Carey Elwes for like Dracula or like Saw or something like that. So like, I don't even really know him from his signature role. I know that he like wears like a Zorro outfit or some shit in this.
Okay.
Obviously, I know that Robin Wright is the princess. And I remember at the time, probably that was going to be the one thing that was a draw for me. Cause I remember as a teenage boy thinking that she was pretty cute. I know Andre the Giant is in there somewhere. I have no idea where or why.
There's your connection with Conan, sort of. They were friends.
And I mean, the most significant thing I would say about my impressions of what Princess Bride is that it's really become like very memeable. I'm pretty sure like Mandy Patinkin is in it. And he's some sort of character that says something like, my name is Rodrigo Montoya, and like, I'm here to kill you or something.
Yes.
Or take my revenge or whatever. And I have no idea what that character, where he fits into the story. I don't know if he's a good guy or a bad guy. I'm assuming he's a good guy. I have no idea. I also know that like Wallace Shawn is in there, I think. And he says something that everybody quotes, like something like indubitably or something. I don't know. He's got some thing he says.
So if Mandy Patinkin is in fact in this and says, I want revenge, who's he talking to? Do you think he's a good guy? Do you think he's a bad guy? Where would you go with that?
I think he's a good guy. I would assume that he's going to be one of like the band of heroes that is on this quest. I mean, obviously, it's got to be about like saving a princess, right? In my mind, it's the Mario story of like, oh, we got to go to the castle and save the princess for whatever reason. Carey Elwes is like the romantic interest. So I don't know, maybe he and the princess were like childhood crushes or something. And I don't know, he's probably poor and didn't get to marry her or something.
Okay.
But yeah, Mandy Patinkin, I guess he's like, maybe he is after like the henchman of the main bad guy. No idea who the villain is at all. Like it could be Mandy Patinkin for all I know. But I would assume that the villain would be maybe an evil king or prince who wants to marry the princess, but he's a jerk. So, or maybe he's Wallace Shawn. Maybe Wallace Shawn is not exactly the most dashing and handsome figure.
Right.
Maybe she has to marry him and she doesn't want to. And that's where he says his funny line.
Right. Okay.
I'm pretty sure there's no sort of like darkness from the legend type of like devil or demon. If there had been some sort of supernatural element to this that I was aware of, that might have been like a bigger draw. It's always really the villains that sell me on something more so than the heroes.
Sure.
Even in Star Wars, like I was all about Darth Vader, man. I was all about Boba Fett. I was all about the dudes in the helmets with the cool weapons. Like,
right.
The one thing I can remember about Legend making me want to see it wasn't Tom Cruise or Mia Sara. It was
Tim Curry.
Tim Curry is the devil guy.
Oh my God. It's so the makeup on that. I remember my brother brought home the Tangerine Dream soundtrack and he just opened up the gatefold and showed me that picture of Tim Curry as the devil. We'd never seen anything like it in the 80s.
Well, so I would say that, like, if you're asking me what, like, I would like this movie to be, I'd want there to be some really awesome villain that was, like, really cool with maybe, like, a cool helmet that rode some sort of, like, black winged steed or whatever.
Yeah.
And, you know, had like glowing red eyes. I mean, I know that's not going to be in the movie. That would have gotten me probably into the theater. And here's something what I want to bring up. You know, we're talking about this movie and sort of framing it as a fantasy movie, which it is. But I think there's an important distinction here between like fairy tale fantasy, which is what I would consider this to be, and like high fantasy, which is something like Lord of the Rings, you know, where you have elements and you have this world where there's possibly some sort of like magical creatures. I don't know if there is any magic at all in this movie. I'm assuming there is. I'm assuming that Andre the Giant is playing like a literal giant, but I mean, I don't know if they make him look bigger or whatever, but I don't know if there's any sort of dwarves or elves or fairies or anything in here. If there was some sort of like fairy creature played by a cute actress, that would be really appealing to me. I guess my problem with The Princess Bride is like, they needed to sell me on this with some more fantastical stuff. And I don't really know how much of that's going to be in it. It seems more like it's going to be swashbuckling sword fights on staircases and shit.
Right. So that's the tone. What do you see as the tone of this movie? You think this is going to be, you know, a kinder, softer, maybe family friendly?
I don't know about family friendly. I know that it's comedy. So in my mind, it's probably closer to something like Your Highness. Have you ever seen Your Highness?
Yes, I have seen Your Highness.
I actually like Your Highness. I mean, obviously, it's not going to have like the R-rated sex and drug humor in it, but you know, and there's like a bunch of things I feel like lately have come out that they've been like, Princess Bride is our main influence. I don't know if you saw that Millie Bobby Brown movie that came on Netflix, Damsel.
Was it any good?
It wasn't good, but it was watchable. Like, you know, it was a time passer. It wasn't terrible.
I believe Joey King was also in like
I saw that one too.
Fantasy. That looked really bad.
I've seen everything that Princess Bride inspired, but haven't seen Princess Bride.
How do you feel about Rob Reiner as a director?
Oh, my, right. This is Rob Reiner, isn't it? That's another reason why it's a shame I haven't seen this, because I love Rob Reiner. I love This Is Spinal Tap. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I mean, I really like Misery. I really like Stand By Me. So, I mean, I like Rob Reiner. I think he's great.
How much action versus love story will there be in this?
I would imagine it'll be heavily weighed on the love story and not so much on the action, is my guess. Although I'm not sure how that's going to work, because for the necessity of the plot, they'll be separated. So I don't know. Maybe there's some sort of magical way they can like have scenes together, like some witches.
Lady Hawk style.
Yeah, some kind of spell. I guess what I'm really wondering is like what level of magic is there going to be, if at all, in the movie? Because if there's magic in the movie, then you've got all sorts of leeway with the story. I mean, that's the great thing about magic is like now you can do stuff that you couldn't do if you're sticking closely to reality. I know there's not a dragon because if there was, I would have seen it. But I mean, Wallace Shawn would be kind of a good wizard. So here's hoping. Here's hoping Wallace Shawn is the wizard. And his name is like Doombungunderbun or something.
In fantasies, typically, what's an inciting incident? What happens in Act 1?
Yeah, I mean, typically we see the world as it is, and it's sort of calm and tranquil, and then some sort of antagonistic force comes in and disrupts the situation. I would imagine in this case it involves kidnapping the princess and taking her away to some other kingdom. And that's what sets the heroes out on their quest, starting with Carey Elwes. And as he goes, he sort of gathers his merry men along the way.
Right. And then so Act 2 is just basically on their way to find the princess.
Yes.
And episodic adventures.
Well, I don't know. Maybe like there's some sort of physical piece of nature that needs to be overcome, and the hero comes upon it, and then there's another character there, and they have some sort of exchange where that's sort of antagonistic but funny, but then they have some sort of fight to cross the bridge or whatever it is. And the hero shows mercy or kindness to the antagonist, the threshold guardian, as you would call it in screenwriting. And then they become allies and go on the adventure together. Like in the case of the Rodrigo Montoya character, I would assume he's one of these types of characters that sort of gets in the hero's way at some point, but then when he realizes that the hero's going after a common enemy, he throws in his sword to the hero's quest and joins him. And I would assume that Andre the Giant is going to fall into that category too. Like he's going to be in a cave or something that they have to go into to get like a sword or some shit.
That. Yeah.
And then Andre the Giant comes out with like a big club, but it's like funny. It's not scary.
Right.
And he pulls some wrestling moves or something on them. And then it would be cut with scenes with the princess being held somewhere and interacting with the villain and, I don't know, spurning his advances comedically or something, some sort of hijinks to keep you invested in her side of the story without her being directly involved in what's the main plot.
And then how do you think it will end?
I would imagine it ends in a castle of some sort, that the heroes have to sort of storm the castle and face off against the antagonists in different ways, sword fights and what have you. If there's magic, that will sort of complicate things in some way. Maybe the hero has some sort of magic weapon. Typically, it's a sword that he's had to retrieve throughout the course of the adventure, and that will be sort of key to him winning the day.
That reminds me of like Crawl style. Almost,
I'm totally just doing Crawl.
Yeah.
I've totally just described the plot of Crawl, which we covered on Tentpole Trauma.
Yeah, which it could very well be. Will it have a happy ending or a sad ending? Bittersweet?
Definitely
how do you
happy
think
ending. For sure. It'll end with like a sunset and Carey Elwes and Robin Wright like kissing and fairies like them getting married, and he becomes king and she's the queen and the kingdom is happy forever.
That sounds good. Is there a certain type of person that you've been like, oh yeah, it's always this type of person who loves Princess Bride and is constantly quoting it?
Oh, there's a type of person for sure. No one in my family, we're all just too bitter and cynical. Even even my wife, Jen, is like, well, I've never seen that movie either. So Yeah, there's really no one in my world. I think my friend Robert, who I worked with at Cinephile, who likes like Neil Gaiman, people who are into Neil Gaiman.
Right. What's your impression of Carey Elwes as an actor in the 80s and the 90s?
You know, it's funny because to me, he seems like the leading man who never really was. Like, he's obviously very handsome. You know, he's got great hair. He's very dashing. I think he's perfectly cast in a movie where you're trying to sort of evoke that sort of Errol Flynn archetype.
Yes.
But he never fully reached star status, really. I mean, people know who he is, but he never had like a headlining movie that was really big. I mean, I think he would have been great as Jonathan Harker in Bram Stoker's Dracula, but you know, that had to go to the heartthrob Keanu to sell the tickets, and we all know how that went, even though I love that movie. But in the late 80s, early 90s, I feel like he was poised to be in a big movie where he was the lead, and he just never got there. I kind of feel that's where Dan Stevens is right now. They have a sort of similar look. And I think Dan Stevens is a great actor and really handsome and could be like a big leading man. But it's like, where is he? Oh, he's in Godzilla X Kong as one of the...
Yeah. Speaking of other leading men who never made it, I feel like Bram Stoker's Dracula has like the who's who. It's Billy Campbell, Carey Elwes, and Richard E. Grant, and they're all kind of like in that same league.
Totally.
Where maybe not Richard E. Grant, but you know, it is kind of like a club of handsome gentlemen that just
Billy Campbell never made it.
Yeah, like Billy Campbell should have been there, and I mean Carey Elwes, you could say, well, you know, he has The Princess Bride, but Billy Campbell had The Rocketeer, but that didn't really ever, you know, break on through to the other side, so to speak. So
yeah, I mean, I think they're even Stevens. I mean, Princess Bride is more beloved than The Rocketeer, but The Rocketeer has its fans. There are a lot of people that like that movie, but he was the star of that and never really went anywhere. So I think they're pretty much evenly matched.
Fair enough. All right. Are you ready to watch this thing, Sebastian?
I'm ready to be swept away by the magic of The Princess Bride.
Let's do it.
Attention. Spoilers ahead. We are about to jump into our deep examination of the movie. So if you haven't watched it yet, I strongly recommend you do to fully enjoy this discussion. If you're already familiar with the film, here's a quick refresher to set the stage.
Bob?
That's right. When I was your age, television was called books. And this is a special book.
Farm boy, fill these with water.
As you wish.
That day, she was amazed to discover that when he was saying, as you wish, what he meant was, I love you.
Enough of that! Fezzik, are there rocks ahead?
If they are, we all be dead.
No more rhymes now, I mean it!
Anybody want a peanut?
Ah! Inconceivable! You keep using the word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Thank you. We'll wait until you're ready. Again, thank you. Oh, there's something I ought to tell you. Tell me. I'm not left-handed either.
You mock my pain.
Life is pain, Highness. Anyone who says differently is selling something.
Bye-bye, boys.
Have fun storming the castle.
Think it'll work?
It would take a miracle. Bye-bye.
Hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
They rode to freedom. And as dawn arose, Wesley and Buttercup knew they were safe. A wave of love swept over them. And as they reached for each other...
What? What?
Nah, it's kissing again. You don't want to hear that.
I don't mind so much. Grandpa, maybe you could come over and read it again to me tomorrow.
As you wish.
All right, so we just finished The Princess Bride. Sebastian, how do you feel?
I feel good.
You enjoyed yourself?
I did, yeah. I liked it a lot, actually. especially the first half. I was really kind of vibing with the first half a lot. Once it got into the second half, I was still enjoying it, but I don't know. For some reason, the first half really worked for me, and the second half was fine, but I didn't quite like it as much. But overall, I liked it a lot.
Right. How do you think you would have felt seeing this in 1987?
I think I would have probably thought it was a little bit boring. The thing that was surprising to me was that it was more adult than I was expecting it to be. I was expecting it to be more sort of kid friendly, and it is sort of, but it's kind of not. Like, it's more really for adults. I had forgotten that it's written by William Goldman, who's like a famous,
yeah, he's excellent. All the President's Men and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. So yes, he's got quite the pedigree.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I was actually impressed with how sophisticated it was as a story. I mean, the story was nothing like Krull, as I predicted. It was much more involved and had more pieces moving around and different players, and the way all the relationships kind of evolved, I thought was really cool and well thought out. Like all the way the characters interacted.
So my main question to you is, even though you were right about the main beats about, you know, a princess being kidnapped and getting to a castle and rescuing her, why does this work? Even though the plot points are tried and true, they do something fresh with it. How did they thread that needle for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it was. I mean, the plot points, the story beats that I predicted are just really sort of broad story beats. Like the actual story in the movie, I think, is a lot more sort of sophisticated and complex while still being simple. It just kind of takes that basic framework and then I think does something a lot more sort of interesting in it. You know, I think it's going for something deeper than just like a typical like fairy tale type of story.
Yeah, totally. And what did you think of the tone? Like, did you think it was balanced? Because that was on this viewing, I was just kind of shocked how well they balanced the humor with not being too slapsticky and then taking the fantasy serious enough that you still care about it. What did you think of the tone?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think the comedy and the sort of humor and tone was all really well done. And I mean, I think that's what Rob Reiner really brings to the table.
Yeah.
I think he's just from working on All in the Family and even like his more dramatic stuff. I mean, you know, Stand By Me, he obviously went on to do movies that are dramatically weighty. So, you know, he knows how to do both comedy and drama. I just think he's really good with that. And I think he had a really strong script to work with. I mean, I will say that all of the humor doesn't totally land for me, but like the tone of it is, I think, really well done throughout. It always kind of, you know, it remains humorous while at the same time, you know, being kind of serious. It manages to pull it off for sure.
What did you think of the framing story with Peter Falk and Fred Savage?
Well, yeah, I was wrong about it not being Judd Hirsch. It's Peter Falk.
I still see how you made that error, though.
Well, as soon as he showed up, though, I'm like, oh, right, it's Peter Falk. It's Columbo. And I mean, I really liked it a lot. I mean, I loved the way, you know, it starts off with Fred Savage just wants to hear stories about sports or whatever. And he doesn't like stories with kissing. And then like the way the narrative gets sort of teased out over the course of the movie where it's Peter Falk bluffs him in some ways. And then like when the kissing starts, he's like, I don't want to hear about that. And you know, I thought it was cleverly employed the way it would sort of like start something and then stop it. And it would be like, no, that, you know, it can't be like that. You're telling it wrong or whatever. That was one of the highlights for me, definitely, was just how charming that was. And I was really impressed by Fred Savage. Like, he does a great job. he's not too precocious. He seems like a real kid. And I mean, I love Peter Falk. He's amazing.
Yeah.
So
there's so much warmth that comes from him. You just want him to be your grandpa.
Oh, big time for sure. Yeah. So I liked all of that a lot. I thought all that worked great.
I thought it was interesting how they call out how it is corny.
Yeah.
He's saying, "Oh, the kissing and this is lame." And a lot of movies do that, and I think it's such lazy writing when they usually do that. They're like, "Well, this is supposed to be dumb," and then it just feels like the writer couldn't come up with anything better, and so they just mock themselves within their movie.
Yeah.
But for some reason here it works because I don't know, because he's a kid or it's corny, but you will like it eventually. It's kind of promising that they'll earn it in a way, right?
Yeah.
Is that it, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. I just think that it's honest. I remember being a kid and the kissing part was, always the mushy part, and I didn't want to hear about that. But, as you get older, you start to like that stuff more.
I love the line where he says, "In my day, television was called books."
Yeah,
and then,
I love that.
And then now, if they were to do it, who knows? He'd be like, "TikTok was called television," or
totally.
where have we gone now? Where you can barely get a kid to sit still and watch a movie or TV anymore.
Yeah.
What did you think of the Mark Knopfler score?
I honestly thought that was the weakest thing about it. Not when he was playing the guitar. When there was guitar parts, I really liked it. But during a lot of the action sequences, it just sounded like a Casio keyboard trying to do orchestration. Like if it had been an orchestra playing it, I think it would have sounded good. But I could just tell these were all late 80s string sounds and horn sounds. It's that keyboard horn.
Yeah,
sound
it was attempting to be orchestral, but it wasn't the real thing. It's almost like a demo.
Yeah,
someone would make these days,
right?
To show the orchestra.
They could get away with it in the 80s because it was new and exciting sort of sample technology or whatever. But
right.
You hear that sound a lot in straight to video stuff from the 90s, and it just to me just says they couldn't afford.
Right, you're totally right. That's so funny. I'm so close to this movie that I don't even hear that. It's just the guitar line, it's the main theme, and I'm like, oh, right, Mark Knopfler wrote this. And I'm like, oh, this is beautiful. I'm loving it. But now that you say that, you're absolutely right.
I mean, he might not have even written that part of the score. That might have been somebody else, and he's just getting credit for it because the guitar theme is the main theme, and there's those guitar parts in it, but. I would bet he probably didn't write all that stuff, but I don't know.
Did you know "As You Wish" as a line before it came out, or no? Okay, because that's another huge, memeable, quotable line. What did you think of "As You Wish" as a thread throughout the entire movie?
It was fine. I mean, I definitely have some 2024 thoughts about part of the story, especially, the whole gaslighting of her during the time when he comes back as the Dread Pirate Roberts, which I like all of that. I like how that unfolds in the story, but then, so the setup of the love story is nice, but, it's very perfunctory. I liked that it was a recurring motif that came back, and that was sort of the thing that reveals him to her ultimately. The love story worked. It was fine, but it wasn't like I was swept away by it or anything. I mean, they're both very cute. They're both attractive.
Oh my God, they're in their
people.
prime. They are in their prime. What did you think of Carey Elwes as the leading man?
I was a little worried at first because I felt like those first few scenes, Robin Wright was working for me immediately, but in those first few scenes, he felt kind of a little bit wooden in the way that Carey Elwes can sometimes be kind of wooden.
Okay.
But he can also be good, and he does rise to the occasion. I feel like he didn't really have a handle on who the farm boy version of Wesley was, but I think once he got into the Pirate Roberts version and then like once Wesley becomes a fully realized sort of character, I thought he inhabited it well. But I think in the beginning, all he does is kind of look at her and kind of smirk and says a few lines. He's not doing a whole lot. Whereas like Robin Wright, I think is really selling it from the beginning. Like she's clearly a better actor than he is, I think, right out of the gate. You disagree?
I feel like he's just looking super attractive and handsome, and that's all he's meant to do is just stand there and look at her with the smoldering look, and it's Carey Elwes and As You Wish, and it's a female fantasy, and I don't know, I think it works for me. Again, I'm looking at this through the 1988 rose-colored glasses of a child. I watched it with my sister and my mom, and they were all fawning over him at the time, and so...
Oh, he's a babe, and he's got awesome hair.
Yeah, exactly. His hair, his eyes, it's just like, wow. But, I agree the character is thinly drawn at the beginning, obviously.
But I would argue that Buttercup is also thinly drawn, but like Robin Wright.
So why are you giving her a pass? Just because
I think
she's
she
a better
does
actor,
something. Yeah, there's just that thing where I can't really say. It's that thing just where I believe her immediately. Like as soon as she's on screen, I believe her that she's this character. Whereas with him, he seems like a young, hot dude who's trying to figure out how to be an actor to me.
Okay.
And he's never been that great. I mean, he's not that great. Like, look at
you don't
their
think
body
he's great
of
in
work.
this?
I just think it's the difference between somebody who's a really great actor, who I think Robin Wright is, and somebody who's fine, which he is. He's fine.
Right. I think this is his niche, though, doing this sort of tongue-in-cheek, winking at the camera type thing. This is what he's best at. And so maybe that's the reason this is his biggest achievement, is because you just look at him and you kind of have to laugh or smile. There's something about him that fits that tone, to me anyway.
He's very handsome and he does fine. I wouldn't want anybody else in the part.
Now, what about Wallace Shawn?
Loved him so much.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the only real marks I have to give against this movie is that he dies halfway through the movie, and I was like, no. And I was hoping against hope at the end, like he'd somehow would have lived and he was going to join in with their team at the end.
Sure.
Not that would have made any sense, but that was what I wanted.
Right.
I loved him, and it was inconceivable.
He's so great.
That's the line.
Yes, inconceivable.
I knew it was like indubitably or something, but I knew it was something, but I was inconceivable with that lisp of his, and the scene with the poison cup or whatever.
Yeah.
It was great.
What a classic.
Love that scene. Yeah, I just loved him.
And I love the moment when Indigo is like, you keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Well, right. That's one of those things that's been memed. Like whenever somebody's arguing in a thread on social media, somebody will post a meme of I don't think you know what that word really means or whatever.
Exactly. What about the rhyming moment and the other two henchmen of Vicini? We have Andre the Giant as Fezzik and Mandy Patinkin as Indigo Montoya.
I thought they were both really good. Obviously, Andre the Giant wasn't a real actor, but I think he's doing a good job here, considering that he's a wrestler and I don't think English was his first language. So I think he does great. He's very charming and lovable.
Yeah.
What's good about that rhyming scene is it's silly and kind of corny, but you immediately like them. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Oh
yeah. I mean, their chemistry is great.
I mean, I think the chemistry between those three characters is one of the highlights of the movie. It's this whole sequence, this whole part of the movie is my favorite, basically.
Yeah.
Once, they kidnap her and they get on that boat, and then they see that they're being followed. And then the whole thing with the climbing up the cliff and everything.
Right.
And
how did you like the look of it? Isn't it great to see a movie shot on location? And even the special effects of some of the miniatures, they look so charming to me. There's no CG. It just adds to the charm.
Well, one thing I thought was really weird, and I liked it, was the climbing up the ropes, the way they were doing it so that it looked like he was climbing really fast. I don't know what they did, if those were puppets or something, but it was really strange, but I liked it.
And he's just going perfectly vertical.
Yeah, well, not even using his legs. His legs are just kind of
Yeah. It's so great.
Yeah, no, I this was the part of the movie that I really, really liked. I was really totally enjoying this. I love the whole thing where Indigo is looking down at him and being like, when are you going to hurry up?
Yeah.
Like, hurry up and get up here so I can kill you. And they're having this conversation, and I immediately liked their whole camaraderie, and their sword fight, like on the cliff,
Oh my God,
is so
amazing.
good.
Yeah.
You can tell they both really, really trained. It's a really good sword fight. I love the whole, like, I have a secret that you don't realize. Like, I am not left-handed. And then Wesley's like, I have a secret. I am not left-handed either. And they totally like switch hands. Great. And that part of it, I was just absolutely loving it. And I love that, they're admiring each other. And
yeah, I love how honorable and polite they are to each other. He's like, well, we'll wait until you're ready. And then they have a nice chat before the inevitable, we're going to have to duel to the death. And it's so endearing.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. There's something about just people being kind to each other that's really appealing to me these days.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we need more of this, right?
Absolutely.
I know you are a big fan of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, and so
big time, yeah.
I think a lot of that swashbuckling is what you're keying off of here, and that's what you're liking.
Yeah, totally.
Is that correct?
I am a big fan of swashbuckling epics, and yes, this is definitely what's appealing to me. If anything, I'm sort of sad that we don't actually get to see Wesley as the pirate Dread Roberts on the high seas.
Oh my God. How great would that be?
Like, this is one movie that I'd be like, give me a prequel of it. Like, I want to see that story for sure. I mean, I enjoy when he tells the story of how, like, you know, he was taken by the Dread Pirate Roberts, and every day he woke up and he told him, like, he was going to kill him or whatever, but then didn't. And he
most likely kill you in the morning. You know,
kill you in the morning.
This movie is so infinitely quotable. Like, the more you watch it, even the famous lines, and then you'll pick up, well, I'll most likely kill you in the morning. Or anybody who knows this movie can, like, quote it.
It's droll, dry humor, which is something that I can always appreciate. I was just surprised that the sword fight was so good. Like, you could tell they really spent the time to put together a really impressive sword fight. And I think the actors, maybe Carey Elwes isn't blowing me away in his portrayal of Wesley in the beginning, but he definitely brought it for the sword fight, and as did Mandy Patinkin.
Yeah, apparently none of them used any stunt doubles except for the moment when he does the sort of gymnastics jump, which is perfectly fine, but the rest of it is all them.
Yeah, it's
and they
really
train
impressive.
Their butts off, and it's very impressive. And, you know, fencing people study it, and the names that they drop when you're using this defense against me, and it's all like real quotes from, you know, masters or whatever. And you can really tell they spent the time to do it right, and it's kind of legendary.
I can see why. It's A+. I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, this would be the Rodney, you know.
Yes,
as
absolutely.
we would say. Like, this is the thing.
The best scene that you want to show somebody to make them enjoy the movie.
Right.
How do you define the Rodney?
Yeah, the scene that you want to show to somebody to convince them that this is a good movie. That's what I would say the Rodney is. It'd be like, okay, look, here's the scene. Because not only do you get the sword fight, you get the charming banter between them, and it is funny. You know, it's obviously over the top with the gymnastic moves, but never too far. It's just really great. It's great.
Yeah, it's so well balanced that with their banter included into the action, it still moves along, and you get a little bit more character, and it's not just like, all right, here's the kick-ass action scene that has no bearing on anything else. It's totally intertwined into the story and the characters.
Yeah, I think it's crucial because it's that forming of the bond between those two that then comes back in the third act.
Right, their respect for each other.
Is basically the one who brings Wesley back from the dead, so to speak. So it's crucial.
And then what did you think of the fight against Fezzik?
The fight with Fezzik is just kind of whatever. I mean, that one was a little lackluster. It's just he jumps on his back and they kind of roll around a lot, and he slams him up against some rocks. I think that could have been a little better, frankly.
I wish they had done Sebastian's idea of Andre the Giant being in a cave with a big club and this like Carey Elwes having to go in there with, a torch or something. I'm like, that would have been a better scene, man.
I mean, I think it's just one of those things where the 80s being what it was, it was fine for the 80s. But like now, if you made this movie, you would have to make that a little bit more of a spectacular scene.
Right. So now we get to the part where he does run off with the princess and he has yet to reveal himself. He's explaining his story and how he's acting the part of the Dread Pirate Roberts. And he says, "Life is pain, Highness. Anyone who says any different is selling something."
That is a really good line. I don't think I really noticed it at the time, but it's a great line. Yeah.
It betrays a little bit of cynicism and truth to the movie, which he can only say as in character as the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Right.
But it still rings true.
I want to talk a little bit about the gaslighting here.
Right.
I just think that this would be the thing that you'd need to kind of rethink if you were doing this movie again now, and let's hope they never do. But it's just a little bit ew, like that he's accusing her of being unfaithful to him, even though, for all she knows, he's died. And it's just a little icky by today's standards. Just like that.
Doesn't he want to know her true intentions? He's testing her because it's been 5 years and he just wants to be sure that she thinks of him as her true love. But I get what you're saying. He lays it on thick and he lets it go for a long time.
Yeah, it goes on for a while where he's still pretending to be the Dread Pirate Roberts, and he's, accusing her of, marrying a prince for money and that she doesn't really believe in love or whatever. She's not faithful. I just think through today's modern lens, this would be considered gaslighting. The bottom line is I don't care, but I'm just saying I could see, Screen Rant articles about this is why Princess Bride is problematic now.
Right. What did you think of the fire swamp? I believe this is sort of the most fantasy element in the whole movie. Did you enjoy the fire swamp?
Yeah. I mean, it was a little underwhelming. I did like the set. I thought it was a cool swamp set. It reminded me actually of the scene in Legend with Maglethorpe or whatever, the swamp witch. It's very 80s. It's fine for the 80s, but it's a little bit underwhelming now. I mean, all it is like these jets of fire come up every now and then. I did enjoy the quicksand.
Yeah, come on, Sebastian.
It was good quicksand, too, because it actually looked like sand.
Yes. All right, so it was called Lightning Sand, and for viewers who don't follow Tentpole Trauma, Sebastian, can you give a little skinny on your ideas about quicksand?
Well, I mean, there was just a time in all of our youth when we were convinced that quicksand would be something we'd have to reckon with at some point. And
absolutely. Every movie had it. You're going to fall into quicksand at some point.
No, I literally thought at some day I would have to deal with quicksand, and like I had better be prepared for that day to come.
And he deals with it fairly well, right, in this movie?
Yeah, I mean, he basically jumps right in and hauls her out.
But he brings a vine with him.
He brings a vine with him.
He cuts the vine first. So lesson number 1, cut a vine.
Yes.
Yank it.
Because there's always vines conveniently around whenever there's quicksand.
Right.
Which I don't think geologically that makes much sense, because you'd think quicksand would be kind of dry in a dry place, not really a jungle. But what do I know? I've never encountered quicksand in real life. I just appreciated that it actually looked like sand. Like it was clearly like a pit they dug out of the sand, and he like dives right into it, like head first. It's pretty impressive.
Balls. It is.
But yeah, so I mean, I enjoyed it, and the giant rats that attack them. I guess they're like little people in costumes or something.
Yes, that's exactly what they were.
But they're fun. They're silly. It just felt like kind of like a side trip into something that seemed vaguely fantastical. It felt like Goldman threw it in there because like otherwise you're kind of missing a key element of the fairy tale story, which is at some point they've got to go into like the forbidden forest and reckon with whatever's in there. And it usually is like not really pertinent to the plot. Like if you think about, it happens in The Hobbit too. Like they go into like Mirkwood Forest and, you know, there's spiders in there and stuff. And like, what does that have to do with anything? But it's just kind of like part and parcel of a fantasy story in a weird way. So it's fine, but you could take that all out and it wouldn't matter.
What did you think of Chris Sarandon as the main villain? I know he's your boy from Fright Night. So.
I love Chris Sarandon. I had totally forgotten that he was in this. I did. Once he showed up, I was like, oh, right, it's Chris Sarandon. He's the prince. Like, I had totally forgotten. I was so delighted when he showed up. I love him. I love Christopher Guest as his sadistic, torture-loving henchman with the 6 fingers. They were great. I enjoyed them. I mean, their plot is a little bit wonky. It's fine. It's functional and it's kind of tongue-in-cheek. I think it's intended to be just sort of like whatever. It's not the most logical of villain schemes.
Did you want a little bit more evil wizard to it, or...
Well, I always want more evil wizard. I mean, that's true of anything. I mean, you can give me a domestic drama, and if you threw in an evil wizard, I'd like it more.
Yeah.
But no, not in this story. It wasn't. It wouldn't have worked in this story. We do get kind of a wizard with Billy Crystal and Carol Kane later on.
Yeah. What did you think of Miracle Max?
I remembered once he showed up, I was like, oh, right.
That is iconic.
Billy Crystal. And then when he's like, have fun storming the castle. Like I've seen that a million times on like trailers or whatever.
And that's another meme moment. And it's Billy Crystal at his most Billy Crystal-ish.
You know what, though? There was a time when I hated Billy Crystal and I would have really bristled at his presence. And had I seen this probably in the 90s, I would have been like, oh, Billy Crystal.
Really? Because of like hosting the Oscars or just too much?
He just wore out his welcome with me when he was at the the height of his fame, but now I miss him. Now I'm like, oh, Billy Crystal.
Right.
I miss that guy.
Yeah.
So I was happy to see him. And I love Carol Kane, so I was happy to see her too.
Yeah, they had really good chemistry. And is this a moment where sort of the fantasy collides with some jokes, or what did you think of the miracle pill and bringing him back to life and possibly being mostly dead?
Mostly dead. I mean, that stuff was cute. These parts of the movie made me most think of like Mel Brooks. Like this was kind of where it kind of veered into Mel Brooks Spaceballs-y type of territory a little bit.
Well, they just let Billy Crystal just off leash and just go for it, dude.
It was fine. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun way to like take the hero from his lowest point and sort of bring him back. Like, he's essentially dead, but then we have this ostensibly magical character come in and sort of bring him back to life. I mean, I did sort of get a little bit tired of the like Carey Elwes can't move his limbs throughout the whole climax of it. I get a little frustrated with stuff like that sort of physical comedy where it's like, I'm half paralyzed.
Right.
But I thought it was a clever way to bring Carey Elwes basically back from the dead, essentially.
It's funny, when I watched it this time, I realized when he pushes his stomach to say true love, and he goes, oh, he didn't say that. He said to blave, which means to bluff. And I'm like, and he bluffs at the end. I don't know if that's a connection that
I'm sure that's the kind of thing. No, I'm sure you're not. That's the kind of thing William Goldman would do. I mean, there's stuff like that threaded throughout the whole movie. Like everything's kind of a callback in that way.
What did you think of the torture machine?
I liked that. That was fun. Yeah.
Can you imagine sucking a year of your life away just like that?
Yeah, if anything, I wanted more of that. Like more
I could see you liking that
sadistic Christopher Guest character. I mean, he's so great, and like the way he played the character, just like that kind of just sort of blithely evil. Like I could have used a little more of him and of the torture device. But yeah, I loved it. I loved that it was like a water wheel thing. Because he was like, we're going to put you on the machine. And I'm like, we're in like the Middle Ages. What kind of machine could they be talking about?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh no, it works.
They figured out a way. Yeah. I could see you wanting to spend more time in the pit of despair along with like the Temple of Doom. It's that sort of 80s creepy place that is in your imagination as a kid from the 80s.
Yeah, well, and I liked the way it kind of looked like a Universal horror movie set.
Yeah. How did you like Andre the Giant's Holocaust cloak and when he tries to scare all the people away from the castle?
It was goofy. I mean, I was kind of like, why does Andre the Giant need to be made to look even more big? And I was also like, what, they set him on fire and stuff? Isn't he going to burn to death?
It's the cloak, but the cloak has the special properties that you can set fire to.
Oh, I got it. Okay, got it. You can set fire to it because it's a magic cloak. Okay.
I'm just trying to point out all the semi-magical moments in this and seeing if any of that sparked your imagination or...
Well, I mean, I feel like they definitely don't go there, like in terms of magic. There's not really any magic. It's funny because I was just listening to a podcast today that was talking about House of the Dragon and like George R.R. Martin's like, fantasy has to be grounded. Like he's very much a proponent of as little of fantasy as there can be in the fantasy kind of thing.
Interesting. Okay.
Which, I mean, I guess is one way to do things. Personally, to my taste, I would have liked a little bit more magic.
Yeah. It's funny. I think Peter Jackson also said that as well. Like he hated when Gandalf uses magic because it's unexplainable. Right. And he's just like, I wanted to limit that. But, there are several uses of it. But it's interesting that most of the masters of the genre, so to speak, don't enjoy magic for magic's sake.
I have a theory as to that. And that's because the easiest thing to do is to like write a character that can like shoot laser beams from his hands.
For sure. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just lazy. Like, oh, I've got a character who can fire lightning bolts at you. Like, no offense to the Emperor in Star Wars, but it's like, you want to try to come up with at least some kind of reason. And I think the stuff that works the best in fantasy is where, yes, it's sort of grounded, not in the sense of like, oh, it's realistic, but there's like, okay, this works because of this. Right. You know what I mean?
Like Balrog versus Gandalf equals a good fight. Right. There's a balance there.
And like, yeah, and you see like Gandalf doesn't just like fire like laser beams out of his staff.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
He can use it for certain things. I mean, I think in the case of Gandalf, it's kind of really vague. It's a little bit too vague. Like I think there could be a little bit more information there.
Right.
But Harry Potter, I feel, is guilty of like the wands just shoot laser beams.
Well, I think the thing to note with Gandalf is that you see that it's taking something out of him. It seems to be some effort in there, not just, I'm just waving my wand and it's limitless. It's basically coming from his will, maybe.
Yeah.
That's a kind of an important distinction to make when we go into magic, I think.
Yeah, I think if for the purposes of this movie, because it's really not trafficking in that kind of fantasy at all, I think that keeping it as low key as they do is the way to go. Having a cloak that is fireproof, having a chocolate covered nut or whatever that brings you back to life. This is all fine. Like this works in the context of the story. And that's another thing too with magic is you want to make it work within the context of the story. And I think that's kind of what George R.R. Martin is getting to, is just like keeping it grounded in that way that it like, you're not like suddenly, way outside the parameters of your world with it.
So the most famous line, which is, hello, my name is Indigo Montoya. What were your feelings on that thread throughout the movie? And did it pay off?
I mean, I liked it a lot because I just love Mandy Patinkin's performance.
Yeah,
I think
he's all in. He's so good.
Flawless throughout the whole movie. I loved pretty much everything he did. I recognize it as being the iconic line of the movie. It's sort of funny because it's not really a story about revenge, although I guess you could say that it's because he loved his father so much. It's a story about love, right? Like, I mean, that's the theme of this movie.
Right.
And so I guess the idea is that he loves his father so much that he feels this need for revenge. But like the character doesn't really feel driven by that, especially in the beginning. You just get the sense that that's what he's all about at all. And then he sort of lets it slip to Wesley that that's what he's all about. And then once he finds out that the six-fingered man, which I love that it's a six-fingered man, is working for the prince or whatever, then he's all in. You know, I like the line. I wasn't completely sold on his character being driven by vengeance, I guess. Even though that line is the thing that everybody remembers from the movie, I feel like it's not really that relevant until the end of the movie.
Sure. Well, I like how it morphs because, you know, he says it all distinguished to Wesley. There's a huge close-up of him, and he says it really eloquently. And then he repeats it again to the Count when they're ready to rock. And then he just turns and runs. And to me, that was one of the biggest laughs of the whole thing, because you think you're going to get a great big sword fight, but the guy is so dishonorable that he's just like, okay, and then books it out of there. And I think, was that a big laugh for you? Or
yeah, I chuckled at that for sure.
Okay. And then the repetition obviously makes it even more memorable when he's like shouting it louder and louder and louder, and then gives him the same cuts. And then, well, like you were saying, he brings it back to love because he doesn't want vengeance per se. He wants his father
back.
Yeah, which is an important distinction, which I think you're picking up on, and that it's not a bloodlust. It's really just when it boils down to it, is if he could have his father back, he would spare him. And that's all he wants, which kind of gives a revenge story that's acceptable to kids. Maybe it makes it all sort of okay in the minds of the rest of us. It's funny that you seem to be better with this as an older adult, because for me, when this came out in the 80s, it was along the lines of Star Wars, where it was such an enjoyable movie because everybody could get into it. You know, every age. I'm like, me as the youngest, my older brother, my older sister, my parents, like, you know, my grandparents, you could watch this movie with anybody. And they just don't make them like that anymore. Like, what is missing that this can be that 4-quadrant or whatever you want to call it movie and still be a good movie? How come we can't have that anymore?
I think because marketing has become so important and so specific that they don't understand how to do this anymore, because everything is so targeted, you know? And then when they really try to do this, they end up with this flavorless mush. You know what I mean? Like this movie has so much personality. Yeah. And it's so like uniquely what it is. Mm-hmm. I mean, I also think that we're living in a time that it's really hard everything is so segmented and compartmentalized that, like, what does that even mean now to have something that everyone can enjoy? You know, it almost seems impossible. But yeah, this movie has that universal quality that I think most people could enjoy it, like in different ages, and it's sophisticated enough for the adults to enjoy it, but it's simple enough for the kids to enjoy it. Yeah. So yeah, it can really work as a family movie for sure.
I mean, I guess it starts with like the feeling and the fantasy that William Goldman wanted to get across. I'm curious what his ideas were when he started writing this. What did you think of the To the Pain moment where he describes chopping off eyes and tongues, but then leaving the ears so that people can hear, "Dear God, what is that thing?"
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That was great. Well, I mean, that really is a far more terrifying idea. I did think that it was a little anticlimactic. Just that's really kind of how it ends, is like Christopher Randon's like, okay, and he drops his sword and they tie him up, and then they just like jump out the window and go off on 4 white horses, and that's it. Yeah. But yeah, I see like structurally what's going on. It's like, yeah, you get the battle of the sword fight with Indigo, and then you get the battle of wits with Wesley and the prince. So it makes sense. It just felt a little small.
Yeah, and in the movie, in your mind, you were saying he gets the magic sword that enables him to take out the dragon or the wizard.
There was kind of the sword, though. The sword was in there, and that was Indigo's sword that his father made. It wasn't magic. But
was it magic because it sort of guided him to the right tree where the nub was?
That's
so
right.
It's one of those, maybe it is, maybe it's coincidence, you don't know. So,
but you got to have a magic sword.
Yeah.
You got to have a haunted forest, and you got to have a magic sword.
Yeah, it did check that box. So when it finally comes down to the ending and the corny love story, and Fred Savage is finally, you can read it. I don't mind it so much.
Mm-hmm.
How did that?
Oh, I love that. The framing thing worked for me the whole time. Like everything about it worked for me. Like I could see why Fred Savage then went on to the Wonder Years and became sort of a big child actor after this. He fucking knocked it out of the park in this movie.
Yeah,
like, you can immediately see like this kid is great.
Right.
Like, he's cute. He's endearing. He's just great. And yeah, the whole thing. And I love that.
Their chemistry is really great too between the two of them. It just works.
Yeah, I love that Peter Fox like almost gets to the end and he's like, oh, you don't want to hear that
right. Yeah.
Like,
so do you understand why this is considered a classic, and how did this movie compare to the movie in your mind?
Definitely, I understand why this movie is a classic. It's very well written. It's very well constructed. The performances are really enjoyable. It's charming. It's smarter than you think it's going to be. It can appeal to people of all ages. It touches upon themes that will resonate with you. It's quotable. It's memeable. It's great. I definitely understand why it's a classic. And for the record, it was never one of those movies where I was like, fuck The Princess Bride.
Right.
Like, that movie really sucks. Everybody likes it. Stupid. The way I think about people who like Taika Waititi movies. But that's just kidding.
Nice.
If you actually think Jojo Rabbit is a good movie, I think you're an idiot.
Yeah, shots fired.
No. Like what you want to like.
Well, did this live up to the movie in your mind?
I would say this exceeded the movie in my mind. I think it wasn't really until I started to really think about it being Rob Reiner that I was like, no, this is actually going to be better than I think it's going to be. Because in my mind, I was thinking, oh, this is a movie that's fun for kids and younger people, but I probably missed the boat on
right. Like
being
the Goonies,
able to enjoy
maybe.
this.
Yeah.
Exactly. I knew it was better than the Goonies, which I think is actually not a very good movie, but I just thought that my chance to truly be able to appreciate The Princess Bride had passed me by.
Right.
But I would say I was wrong. I think I really enjoyed it.
It seems like you might have enjoyed it more since you watched it later in life.
Yeah, I think if I had watched it in my 20s, I wouldn't have liked it.
Yeah.
Like, I think I'm in a place now, especially after having written so many of my own stories and really having thought about how stories work and stuff like that. I have a more of an appreciation for just, how well crafted this is. I mean, William Goldman is a great writer. The only thing I would say about the structure of your podcast that I kind of regret is I'd almost like to have watched the movie and then come back like a week later.
Right.
Because I could have thought about it more.
Yeah,
a little bit.
totally.
Because I bet I will think about it. Like, I think this movie will stick with me and I'll be like, hey, you know what? I'm really seeing the cleverness there of this, like even stuff that we might have mentioned where I said, oh, I don't know if that really worked for me. I may come back and think that it did work later. It's just,
we should maybe do it for Tentpole Trauma.
There you go. Yeah.
Well, and I think part of the reason this movie was so successful was because of home video. And I think this movie really, really benefits from repeat viewings. And it's the reason why people quote it so much. It's because you watch it and it's like a warm blanket. It's just like, oh, I'm just hanging out with this kind-hearted, warm, friendly, heartfelt movie. And every time you revisit it, you feel the same feelings and the lines get funnier and another line will jump out at you and be, this one's my favorite line now, or this character's my favorite. There's a lot in there to appreciate. And I think repeat viewings really benefit it.
Agreed. Or as you say, agreed.
Agreed. All right. Before we say goodbye, I just want to jump back to the love story. And what did you think of the love story? And did it relate to your experience of love in real life at all?
I mean, I think it's a fairy tale version of true love. I mean, my idea of true love is far more grounded and practical.
Fair enough.
I think that these kind of romantic notions of love can be kind of harmful, honestly. Like, I think that true love is being with somebody every day and having it not be a fairy tale all the time, and supporting each other through good times and bad times and all of that. So I think it's a nice notion. I think it's a good way for young people to sort of look at love. I think that as you get older, you need a more practical version to cling to.
Right.
So I don't object to it. I do think there can be something unhealthy with people sometimes. They expect, I think a lot of people that are sort of end up alone in life.
They're expecting the kiss with the sweeping sunset and the music to swell. And
right. I think that you should hope for that at some point in your romance with somebody. I think you should definitely hope to have moments where you feel that way. And I think that's a great way to feel. But then at some point, there's the actual like nuts and bolts of love and the day-to-day of love. And I actually, as an older person, have come to really appreciate that kind of more.
Right.
So I'd like to see like Princess Bride 2 and have that element explored.
Right. And how does true love live on into old age and through past the honeymoon phase? I do think that when I watched it this time, that their tongue-in-cheekness also really hit home for me, and that humor is also tied up in their love. They're saying true love, but they're kind of laughing at it at the same time and saying like, well, of course I love you, but then they'll say a joke or something like that.
It
and I
feels
think that's
a little
also
tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, and I think that's also part of what love can be, is also being able to laugh at yourselves, and you're serious about your love, but you're also not serious.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the tone of this movie for me is all about, and why it hits home with me.
Right. Like I didn't come away from it feeling like when I saw like Twilight or something, where it's just like, oh,
what did
gross.
You feel at Twilight? Yeah, gross.
Well, but like Twilight's trying to like put
yeah.
forth that sentiment, but it's just all wrong and icky.
Right.
In this case, I think it's what's needed for the story. I don't think it's wrong to think of love that way. I just think that you also should think about it in practical day-to-day terms.
Yes, fair enough. All right, well, Sebastian, I'd like to welcome you to the Princess Bride family. You've seen The Princess Bride. I'm very happy you did.
I'm part of the fan club now, yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Give me the brochure.
Sounds good.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming on.
All right, man, we did it.
Later.
Thank you for listening to the Movie in Your Mind podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Follow us on socials, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, and Facebook. Email us at themovieinyourmindpodcast@gmail.com. Theme song track Odeon by Tomorrow's Tigers.